You're probably wondering why I'm recording this from my bed with the dog in the background instead of sitting nicely at my desk like I normally do for these. Trust me, I have a good reason, and it's relevant both to what I want to talk to you about and to my poor skinned up face. See, somebody told me recently that when they got involved with their synagogue, one thing they noticed was that when the rabbi chose to teach on something, it was because that same rabbi was struggling with the concept internally. So we're going to talk today about the thing I've been having the hardest time with, which is the need for rest. Like a lot of people in Charlotte, I'm working multiple jobs, not getting a lot of sleep, not getting a lot of downtime, and this week it caught up with me in a big way. I nearly passed out at Pride in Monroe on Sunday, which is why I didn't get a chance to record when I came back to the house afterwards. I had to leave work on Wednesday because I had a migraine. And then Thursday, I ran home to get something on my lunch, got in a fight with a set of concrete steps and lost. Skinned up my knees, banged my shoulder, skinned up my face, broke my glasses. I'm wearing a 6-year-old backup pair until the new ones get here. And all that could have been avoided if I had been conscious of my need for rest. My dad always said, a hard head makes for a soft behind. And this week, mine got well and thoroughly tenderized. And that's so easy to do, right? Dog, would you calm down? A lot of us, especially growing up in the South, grew up with the phrase, so loud I can't hear myself think. We live in this world that's constantly throwing stimuli at us, constantly pressuring us to be engaged and be productive. And we live in a constant state of stress over it. The lack of rest is such a denial of our own needs that it profoundly affects both our physical and our mental health. In substance recovery, stress states that put a person at a risk of relapse are described using the acronym HALT. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Anytime you're in one of those states, your emotions are harder to regulate, and it makes everything seem worse than it is. So many religions have teachings about the need for rest. In Islam, there are not only 2 hadith talking about it, but there's an unconfirmed story of the Prophet Muhammad cutting the sleeve off of his prayer robe because even the cat was supposed to be allowed to rest. He didn't want to wake the cat up who was sleeping on it. In Judaism, the reason there's so many laws about what can and cannot be done on the Sabbath. Sir, we are talking about rest. Calm down. Terriers. The reason there's so many rules about what you can and cannot do on the Sabbath is because it's supposed to make sure that you get actual rest rather than the health equivalent of speeding through a stop sign. One of the most famous modern Buddhist teachers says that rest is the first step in Buddhist meditation. One of the most direct... Reynolds. This is why I usually record in the office. One of the most direct examples from religious texts is the Bible story of Jesus calming the storm. This is a figure who had been raised in the area. Half his disciples had previously been fishermen. There's no way any of them got on that boat that night not knowing that a sudden storm was a possibility. But the risk was worth it to them to get a few minutes of peace and quiet. They wanted to just get away from the crowds. Yeah, it's a story about a miracle, but they didn't go out there looking for one. They just went out there looking for a break. So if medicine, psychology, multiple religions are all saying that getting appropriate rest and quiet are so important, why do we push ourselves so hard all the time? We live in a culture that teaches us from childhood that taking time off is a bad thing and some kind of failure. Even children as young as 5 years old, are penalized if they need to take a day off from school. Capitalism needs us too exhausted to rest and too afraid for our worth and our survival to opt out. So we're fed the narratives of hustle culture from the time we're born. Knowing that this narrative is propaganda, meant to keep us in service to existing structures of power, we begin to understand that resting when we need to is not just necessary, but an act of resistance. Even in spaces focused on social change, we often feel a push to be able to do everything for everyone all the time. But by setting boundaries and by making time to be still and to rest, we keep ourselves from burning out too hard to continue. One thing I've learned from a lifetime of health issues is that if you don't make time for rest when you need it, your body's going to make time for you, and the timing will not be at all convenient, as I saw this week. So as you go through this week, try to be intentional about how hard you push yourself versus how willing you are to rest when you need it. The road to a better world for all of us is a marathon, not a sprint, and we have to pace ourselves if we're going to make it to the finish line.